Those of you who have visited the app, please tell me if you can rate lunch. Can you rate lunch? Okay, so we won't try to do it now. Cool. Our speaker this afternoon is Wayne McCurry, who will be speaking about economics and business climate, slow economic growth forecasts, increased interest rates, and a volatile rand. What you need to know. So let me just share with you a bit about Wayne, and then we'll kickstart the session. Wayne completed school at Kimberley Boys High in many years ago. As close to the year I was born, so out of respect, we can't say that. But I'll give you a hint. He studied at UNISA in 1979. Whoa. While completing his articles of clerkship in Pietermaritzburg, and then Wayne finished his articles in 1985. How come? How bon? And then he started his first employment with sugar manufacturer for 3 years as a management accountant. In 1988, he joined Lifeco Assurance, a company taken over by Momentum in that year. In 1991, he was appointed as a portfolio manager and chief strategist at Momentum Asset Management. In 2002, Wayne became the director of investments for Sage Life for 1 year, after which he rejoined the First Rand Momentum Group as portfolio manager. Initially with the multi-management operations and then to Momentum Asset Management. In 2013, that's close, Wayne transferred to Momentum Wealth to establish their private clients portfolio management business. Wayne appears regularly as a marker commentator on radio and TV. So please welcome Wayne McCurry.
Good afternoon, everyone, and please excuse my voice. I've got a bit of a cold. It's always something when you hear your own CV like that and you realize how quickly time does go. And I also know that there's only one time worse to present than after lunch, and that's before lunch. So hopefully I can keep you all from falling asleep during the presentation. Talking about my age, ultimately I think it's actually quite good to grow old, because then you don't worry about keeping up with all the latest fashions and all the latest shoes and the latest music and the latest hairstyle. You just are what you are. So for all you young people here, it's not that bad when you're growing old. Right, I'm here to talk about South Africa in Maine, but before you can talk economically about South Africa, you've got to understand we're part of the global environment. We're not isolated yet. We're in fact probably more influenced by what happens outside of South Africa than what happens inside of South Africa. And that's really what I'm going to talk about. To try and put the last few years into perspective, and then to give an idea of what I think could happen over the next few years. It's always difficult to predict the future because that is, in essence, impossible to do. So it's just really my views of what I think could happen over the next few years. But maybe the most important point I want to leave here with you today is to talk about the commodity cycle. South Africa is a commodity producing country. We mine iron ore, coal, platinum, gold, coal, a lot of things, manganese, copper, and we export it. And the prices we get for what we export essentially determines how we do as a country. So in the good years, prices of commodities are high, we do well. In the bad years, it's because prices of commodities are low and we do badly. So let me try and explain that in a bit more detail. First of all, to start with what happens in the world, because what happens in the world affects commodity prices and it affects South Africa. So let's just look at the world very quickly. We had the global financial crisis 6-7 years ago now. The world from an economic viewpoint almost came to an end. It was actually disastrous. Quite frankly, we were lucky to live in South Africa because we weren't nearly as badly affected as other countries globally. But post the global financial crisis, the United States has been the strongest economy, or more correctly, shown the strongest recovery. And as a result, the US dollar has been very strong. The US dollar has been strong for the last 5 to 7 years. It's been by far the strongest currency in the world. So part of rand weakness, and we all know about rand weakness, is actually not rand weakness, it's actually dollar strength. Now, when you get such a very strong recovery in any currency, it actually starts to harm your country. I mean, we can hardly believe that in South Africa, that you would think a strong currency would harm your country, but it does. Your exports suffer. Your companies with overseas branches don't make as much money, they suffer. So the US is actually quite concerned about the strong dollar. And interest rates are going to go up in America, but they're not going to go up as quickly and by as much as what a lot of people think. Simply because the Federal Reserve is worried about dollar strength. As I've said, it's not all good news having a strong currency. Turning to Europe, Europe has not really recovered yet from the global financial crisis 6-7 years ago. They've had all the problems with Greece and all the debt issues in Portugal and Spain and Ireland, and they're only now really starting to find their feet. So they've had a very, very slow recovery, and they've kept interest rates negative. I mean, that's also another concept we do not understand here in South Africa. In Europe, if you put €100 into the bank and you go back in a year's time and ask for your money, they only give you €99 back. They actually take one of your euros. You pay, when you deposit money in Europe, you actually pay the bank's money. And that is for a very simple reason, is they don't want you to deposit the money in the bank. They want you to spend it to try and get the economy recovering. And by and large, this is working, even though it's taken a very, very long time. The euro should strengthen as a currency. It's been very weak against the dollar now for a while. And as the European economy recovers, the currency should strengthen as well. But most important for South Africa is China. The good years we had from 2002 through to 2008, by and large, were because of China. China became a major global economic power in those years, and they started to buy iron ore, and they started to buy platinum, and they started to buy coal. So the prices went up, and we, along with other commodity countries, Australia, Canada, South America, a lot of other African countries benefited hugely from the higher commodity prices. So what happens to Chinese growth is vitally important for our own well-being. The Chinese growth pattern looks quite stable. They used to grow at 12%, they're now only growing at 6%. I mean, 6% is very high, but it's not as high as 12%. And the result of Chinese growth slowing down is that there's too much supply of commodities at the moment. There's too much platinum around, there's too much coal, too much iron ore. Because 5-10 years ago, everyone thought China would continue to grow at 12%, so they opened a new mine and they produced more goods, and they thought prices would only ever go up. And the best example there is the oil price. You know, in 2007, oil was $150 a barrel. Literally 5 months ago, it was $30 a barrel. That's the extent of the fall. Today, it's up at 50 again, so it is recovering somewhat. So there seems to be some stabilization in commodity prices because the excess supply is coming out of the system. But if China collapses, I don't think it will, but if China does collapse, we would go into a virtual immediate recession. We are that reliant on export of commodities to China. So the stimulus packages, they've cut interest rates in China, they've released a lot of bank liquidity, seem to be working, and certainly the demand for commodities out of China seems to be reasonably stable. So that part of the world, let's call it America, Europe, China, actually looks okay. It's reasonably well balanced. There doesn't seem to be any excesses. The economies are at least growing. However, when you turn to the commodity producers like South Africa and the rest of Africa, life has been very tough for the last 5 years. All we've had is falling commodity prices. So if you use an analogy of South Africa being a person, commodity prices is the salary we earn, and it's been falling for 5 years, and it's been falling strongly for 5 years. And ourselves, Nigeria, Angola in Africa, South America, Brazil in particular, Russia as well, Australia as well, we're all commodity producers, and we've had a very tough time in the last 5 years. So as a summary, the global environment actually looks reasonable. You know, I don't think much is going to change. There doesn't seem to be any excess debt in the system. The main economy seems stable, and next year will probably be a little bit better than this year, as I'll show just now. This is all actually quite supportive of South Africa. So there's no real external global threat that I see developing over the next 2 or 3 years that will adversely affect South Africa. But if China collapses, it will be very negative. I don't think China will, but obviously anything could happen. And that's the true big danger to South Africa. Just looking very quickly at what growth is expected. I mean, America this year should grow 2.5%, next year 2.5% as well, so that's quite stable. Europe a little bit lower, but certainly getting better, 1.5 to 1.6. China this year expected to grow at 6.5 and then falling a little bit next year to 6.2. So overall that looks good, but here's the bad news one, and Brazil is the worst example. Brazil's in a full-scale recession, minus 4%. Next year they're going to be 0. So here in South Africa we're about 0.5%, 0.5% this year, because we're not as reliant on commodities as what Brazil is. But certainly, they certainly wouldn't bid for the Olympic Games with the economy in recession. When they did bid, the economy was growing. So, you got to be very careful with countries that bid for the Olympic Games, because normally you only bid when you're really doing well and you feel rich as a country. And by the time it arrives and actually happens, you could very easily be in a recession. Same thing happened to Greece, same thing's happening to Brazil now. So globally, for the world, growth is going to improve a little bit from this year to next year. And as I said, that's quite supportive of South Africa. So turning to South Africa now, and sometimes it's best to look at South Africa in pictures rather than graphs and slides and numbers. So 10 years ago, life was good. We had electricity, we had water, we had money, we had strong growth. We didn't have any electricity, but that didn't really matter. And Julius was still in the ANC, so in fact everyone was happy. There wasn't a sad person around. And in fact life was so easy, life was so good. You could actually have a little sleep on the job there. There wasn't much to do. Everything was working quite well. But the last few years, things have become a little bit more difficult. Things aren't so easy anymore. There's not that many smiles around. There's not that many happy faces around. Life's not so easy anymore. I'm starting to get a little bit worried now. And in fact, things started to get tough. You started to sweat a little bit. It's not that easy now. Okay. Running out of money, deficits, capital expenditure, less income, rising debt. Life's hard. And in fact, I wish I could show this to everyone, and sometimes I do. By the way, that's him pushing his glasses back. And apparently in one of the speeches he did, he pushed his glasses up at least something like 72 times. You wonder why you just don't buy a pair of glasses that fit and don't fall off your nose. But anyway, and Des van Rooyen, otherwise known as the Weekend Special, was the best and most qualified finance minister for the job. But don't worry, I actually love Pravin Gordhan. The reason why Des van Rooyen is called the Weekend Special is he was finance minister for 4 days, of which 2 fell over the weekend. But I'm sure you all know about the credit agencies, and I'll talk about them later, and the possible downgrade to junk status. It didn't happen. Okay, and you must actually thank the president for that. Because the reason why it didn't happen is that there was such a crisis caused by the appointment of Minister van Rooyen as the finance minister that I don't know whether you could call it the true powers in the ANC or the powers behind the ANC actually forced the state president to appoint Pravin Gordhan, and it galvanized serious action within the government to avert a credit downgrade, and it actually worked. We did not get downgraded. And certainly 6 months ago, there was a very strong chance that we would have got downgraded. So sometimes a crisis is actually a good thing, because a crisis galvanizes action and gets things moving. And I believe we're moving on the right path now. I mean, we're going to take action on SAA, we're going to take action on the post office and various other state-owned enterprises that have been very poorly run and cost a lot of taxpayers' money over the last 2 decades or so. I mean, Eskom's even been sorted out now. There's a very competent and highly respected chief executive put in there now. So sometimes a crisis is not necessarily a bad thing, because when a crisis happens, you actually get action. Right, let's talk about government debt. Here is our South African government debt profile. And you can see how in the last, call it 5, 6, 7 years, it's just gone up. So it's doubled in the last 5 or 6 years. Now, This is not entirely the government's fault, by the way. And let me explain that. These were the glory years. These were the years when government debt actually fell because there was more money coming in than going out. There was more tax revenue coming in than expenditure going out. And very similar to any one of us, when you earn more money, you spend more money. So the government was earning a lot of money, so they started to spend a lot of money. They employed another 1 million people in the civil servants. But most important, or more important than that, is the 17 million people on grants. Now, we could afford this in the good years. We could easily afford it in the good years. But what happened is the good years stopped. So in other words, the income fell. Commodity prices fell. Mining companies paid less tax. Our economic growth rate went from 4.5% to 0.5%. There's just less money around. So the big reason for the rise in debt is not because the government has spent more in the last 5 years. In fact, they're spending much the same or slightly less. The problem is revenue growth has fallen. And if you look at that, you understand it a little bit more. Now, at the bottom of that arrow, before it started to rise, our debt was incredibly low. It was about 20% of our gross domestic product, which by global standards is very, very low, or was very low. It's now about 50%. So it's not disastrous, and I want to stress that. We're not on the eve of bankruptcy. We are a long way from that. There's many, many other countries in the world that are far worse than South Africa. But the point is, it can't get much higher without it costing a lot more money. In other words, should our debt continue to rise, we will get downgraded to junk status. And as I'll also explain later, essentially what junk status means is you pay more to borrow money. That's what it ultimately boils down to. Now, I've spoken a lot about the commodity cycle. And here's the commodity cycle, and these are the good parts of the commodity cycle. This is the up cycle. So you can see during the up cycle, our debt stays stable and might even fall because you make so much money from tax. Your economy does so well, the mines do so well, everyone pays more tax. But you can see in the areas that are not shaded, in other words, the tough times, debt goes up, and that's exactly what's happened now. So the old saying is very important. You know, when things just can't get any worse, they probably won't get worse. And as I'll show on the next slide, we've had a tough time here in South Africa in the last 6 months. It hasn't been easy here. But the mere fact that it's been so bad probably means it's going to get better, because it's highly unlikely we have a recurrence of so many negative things happening at exactly the same time. And the biggest negative is the down cycle in commodities. It is by far more important than politics or anything like that. Politics doesn't help, but politics has not caused the down cycle. Politics hasn't caused the collapse of the rand. Politics hasn't caused government debt to go through the roof. What's done that is the commodity cycle, and I want to stress that quite emphatically. The reason why we've done badly in the last 5 years is because commodity prices have fallen. The rand is so massively cheap because of low commodity prices, and it can strengthen quite strongly, but we need the prices of coal and platinum and iron ore, etc., to go up before it does that. I could be wrong, but currently mining companies are producing commodities well above the cost of what they're selling it at. So in other words, the average cost to produce oil in the world is about $80, current price is $50. All of those high-cost producers will close down and the price will recover. So they might stay low for a while, but it won't stay low forever. In other words, the future for South Africa actually looks a lot better than the immediate past. I actually think the next few years will be better than what we've seen over the last few years, simply because commodity prices should turn up. As I mentioned earlier on, we've had a tough time these last few months, well, in fact, the last few years, but it's been emphasized in the last few months. All of them, unfortunately, are negative. So the first thing, we've had the worst political uncertainty and lack of cohesion in the government since 1994. And there is no doubt about that. Now, I think that will improve because it simply, quite frankly, can't get much worse. So I think it will improve. We've also had, as I've said a few times, very low commodity prices, collapsing rand, drought, and electricity. Now, these 6 things have happened all at more or less the same time. So that, by definition, it's very unlikely to happen again, because they are, in essence, relatively unusual. I mean, the drought is the worst in the 102 years. So that's unlikely to happen again next year. And the electricity side seems to be sorted out. Right, let's talk about the credit rating and this junk status. There are 3 rating agencies in those columns there. Standard & Poor's, S&P, Fitch and Moody's. And the red block is the one to look at. The red block is the foreign credit rating. You can see Standard & Poor's is the BBB minus, Fitch is the BBB minus, and then Moody's is one level above that. But what's important is that in the table on the left-hand side, that's sub-investment grade, that's junk status. You can see on the S&P and Fitch, we're one level above junk, and Moody's, we're 2 levels above junk. So we're not junk status. And what's good about this is it's not as though these rating agencies did us any favors. I actually don't like the rating agencies. I think they've made so many mistakes in the past. But be that as it may, they still have a huge influence. The mere fact that they didn't downgrade us doesn't mean they've done us a favor. It's because they truly believe that this is not a junk status country, that things here are actually higher or better than other junk status countries, and that is actually quite positive. They look at it again at the end of the year, so this is not a one-off. I mean, we hopefully going to be in a better position at the end of the year, but understand you're going to hear this story again later. Right, I've spoken the whole time about commodity prices. Yeah, they are in dollars.